everybody. Welcome to DC207. This is our first month in our new space, Open Bench project. Hope you all enjoy the new space and hope everything works well for you online joining us moving forward. It's been fantastic, and let us know if you have any issues or feedback you want to give. You can let either Ben's know or just email us at root@dc207.org. First thing I'll shout out is the main Sec Slack. If you are not a part of it, you're more than welcome to join. It's a great place to keep connected after the event and also share information. Just, have a good chat here and there. If you want to join, mainsec.org is the channel, is the name, and you can self-service. Just pop in your email address and join. So with no further ado, I will hand this over to Mr. Ben Allen for his talk, CVEs for the uninitiated. And we will trade microphones here real quickly.
Give me the power. I want to talk to the people out there on the internet. Oh, right here. Okay. Hey, can you guys hear me online? Maybe. Oh, you can. Oh, great. Hey, Brandon. Thanks for joining. All right, guys. I'm going to just get rid of this. All right, so thanks for coming to DC207, now in a different space. Totally cool, awesome. Thank you so much, Ben, for helping organize this. This has been most helpful. Tonight, I'm going to give this talk called CVEs for the uninitiated. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, that's not the next slide. All right, so if you don't know who I am, actually, do you mind if I take? Oh. If you don't know who I am, my name's Ben. I've been solving problems with technologies for the last 11 years or so in my career, and specifically I'm working on security problems over the last 4 years. Right now I'm a manager and a team lead for a penetration testing team for one of the largest healthcare conglomerates in the United States. And other stuff that you should know about me, but we maybe haven't talked, I'm a cat person, really big cat person, I have two. And I learned how to play the banjo during the COVID lockdown, and I'm starting to get really good. It's weird. My neighbors hate me so much, but anyways, so that's what I've been kind of up to over the last year. So I like to share an agenda. So our agenda today is going to be that we're going to talk about terms about CVEs. We're going to talk about how to submit a CVE with a root CNA and a non-root CNA. I'll tell you what those specifically are here as coming up. Why you want to do this, where to start looking, my personal recent experiences, and done. We'll be done. So, all right. So I created this presentation because I really didn't understand how CVEs work, and I really wanted to change that. I had been seeing a lot of vulnerabilities in some of the work that I've been doing, and I'm just like, how do the CVEs work? And actually, so shout out to Erica, who's here tonight. This was heavily inspired by her talk that she gave in November of last year, Attack Philosophy and Case Studies. It's really good. If you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. It's on our YouTube. And basically in that talk, she kind of goes through a real world scenarios of how you can apply attacks, and then she was getting CVEs from those. And I was like, wow, that's so cool. I see a lot of these same vulnerabilities in the work that I do day to day. Why am I not getting CVEs? I should probably do something about that. So I was very much interested. So I had a goal, right? I wanted to go from CVEs, how do they work? This music video, by the way, is 11 years old now. Yeah, I feel old. So if you don't know, that is what's his name? Yeah, Violent J. It's a clown. He's a clown. Child's entertainer, actually. So I wanted to go from how do they work to publishing my own CVEs, and this is kind of how I got there. So before we go too much further, unlike this corgi, I am not an attorney, and I do not advise you to do anything. So these opinions are of my own. I am no lawyer. Take my advice with a grain of salt. This is not due to employer in any way, shape, or form. Open Bench Project DC207 or any sensible person or entity that is not Ben Allen. So with that being said, just be careful. All right, so terms of endearment. Let's talk about terms. Now, this is going to be really, really simple, but I just want to get these out of the way. So CVE, what is it, right? Well, a CVE is an acronym, and it stands for the Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures. And there's this thing called the CVE program, right? And the CVE program is a group of people that manage these CVE records, and we'll talk about that for a second. It's funded by the Department of Homeland Security and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. So your tax dollars are hard at work funding this kind of database. And the program catalogs CVE records. A CVE record is basically a vulnerability. So each CVE that's out there, each record, represents a vulnerability, and each vulnerability record is organized with something called a CVE identifier, okay? So you've probably seen these, they're commonplace, right? It's like CVE, a year, and then a set of numbers, right? And that's basically just the ID associated with that specific CVE. Each record has a standard set of data, so it's like consistent. There's descriptions, references, creation dates, and this is actually really cool because before CVE was a thing, basically every company had their own way of disclosing security and issues in a variety of different ways. Like, so they'd use different language, they use different numberings, it would just be very confusing. So the CVE records and the organization itself really kind of came about through the necessity for a common language about vulnerabilities. If you've not seen one of them before, this is what they look like. They're really, really simple. And again, they follow a format. There's a CVE ID. This is just something I just pulled called the Shopware e-commerce platform. There's a vulnerability here. There's references. In your references, there's usually a set of things here. Like so the first one they have, and this kind of changes a little bit from record to record, but this one specifically shows a confirmation where the vendor or the developer confirmed that this is actually an issue, and then there's references attached to that. There's something called an assigning CNA, and that's GitHub, and we'll talk about that in a second. A date the record was created. So the date that it's created versus the day that it's actually published and made available for people to consume, there's usually a delta there, change. So yeah, anyways. And the description is pretty standard, and I'll talk a little bit about the standard descriptions here in a second. All right. Any questions so far? Good, good, basics, awesome, cool. More terms. This is the last one, I promise. So we need to talk about what a CNA is. So a CNA is a CV numbering authority. Does anybody know like what that is to have an acronym, to have like an inside another acronym? What are those called? I was thinking about it today. I was like, gosh, I really want to tell them what this means. I heard it once, but I'll have to look it up. But basically, it's a CVE numbering authority. It's an organization, and they're all over the place. They're huge, massive companies to like organizations that you know. And basically, what they're responsible for doing is assigning vulnerability IDs, or those records, to products with a agreed upon scope and a set of rules. So basically, they have a set of rules they have to follow to maintain their status as a CNA. And basically, it's like they have to, you know, send the person an email if they disclose a vulnerability and things like that. There's actually a whole set of rules, which is really interesting to dig into, and I would definitely recommend checking out at some point, but not for this particular talk. So I just want to kind of talk about like the kinds of CNAs. So there are two kinds that, in the very stripped down version of this, is simply a root CNA and just a regular CNA. So root CNAs, there's like a couple of them. It's MITRE. Again, I think it's government funded organization, and then CISA, which we had just mentioned before. And these guys are the authorities, right? So they police the other CNAs, and the CNAs, and this is definitely not an exhaustive list here. This is just a sample of the CNAs that are out there. Adobe, AMD, Apache, Apple, so on and so forth. And basically, these companies, if they get a vulnerability disclosure from a researcher, they are able to create their own identifier number and then publish that as they see fit within the framework rules of the CNA like partner agreement. So, all right. So let's say somebody wants to insert a vulnerability record. Like, what do you do? So there's a couple of different processes here. So we're going to talk about root CNA disclosures and non-root because they're just a little different. So for CNAs, the rule is this. If your software, like let's say Adobe Reader, for example, right? Adobe Reader, if you have a problem with Adobe Reader, you need to talk to Adobe because they're a CNA. You don't need to actually contact a root CNA for this, right? In fact, if you do that, they will tell you that you're doing something wrong. I've definitely done this. So you're like, talk to the CNA. But if you're working with like if you're working with a piece of software that's owned or created by something homegrown like Joe Schmo's DocuReader, for example, you would actually want to go directly to the root CNA to do your disclosure because they're not a CNA. Okay. So how do you tell them? So if your bug is not found in the software of a CV numbering authority, i.e. again, Joe Schmo's DocuReader, these are just roughly the steps. Step one, you have to disclose the findings to the responsible party for the software. Step two, you need to get a CVE reservation. And step three, you need to publish findings. So we're going to dig into each one. So step one, when we say disclose findings, like what am I talking about? Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to figure out how to talk to your vendor. This is where I say Google stuff, right? You need to find out information about the vendor that has the software. You want to have security disclosure process. 9 times out of 10, they don't. Do they have a published email address where security related things can be sent to? Again, that's a great way to talk to the vendor about these bugs. Do they have a support email address? Talk to them that way. And then worst possible way to do this is to actually talk to a salesperson. And I have totally done that, and it really scares them. Yeah, they go into like panic mode, and they're like, "I'm talking to a hacker! Oh my god! Let me get my supervisor." So you will scare them. So you need to contact that vendor one way or another, right? Plainly state the issue very nicely with a nice proof of concept. Let them know what's going on. State that you will be reserving a CVE and you would like to work with them on the remediation and coordinate a disclosure of this problem. This is your olive branch to them saying, I am going to do this thing regardless of what you say. I want to work with you on that. Let's talk about it. And then you want to state an expectation on when the security issue should be resolved. Now, this is called an embargo in a lot of cases, where you basically state, hey, vendor, I'm going to give you 90 days to do something about this, or 45 days to do something about that. Embargoes aren't like set in stone. They can be changed, and you can work with them on an embargo that works well for them. But the expectation, you want to be firm with them. You want to make sure they know that this is going out, this is going to be published, and they need to start fixing it, okay? So after you talk to them, that's great. What do you do next? Well, you need to reserve a CVE, like right away. Don't wait for the vendor to respond to your email of disclosure. Start the CVE process now, okay? You can do that by visiting the cveforum.mitre.org, and we're gonna take a look at that here in just a bit. So one of the things I just wanted to mention here, you always need to double check to make sure that your bug already isn't in the database of vulnerabilities. So again, Google stuff. So if you're looking at a piece of software and someone else has already found something, you can't re-report the same CVE. That's just the way it goes, right? So just make sure that nobody has reported it yet. While you reserve that CVE, there are a few things that you need to do. You need to determine the attack type. So, and MITRE will ask for all of this, right? So they'll want to know, can this attack be performed remote, local, physical, or is it context dependent on the situation? You'll want to disclose the components. So you'll want to have the version of the software you're working with. the component of the software that you're working with specifically. So if there's like a sub function or feature in the software, you want to specifically state that. And then you want to, again, the version. And then you want to suggest a short description. So MITRE will double check you on the description, and they will revise it where they see fit. But basically, their examples are, they follow the same sort of pattern. There's a vulnerability in a component of a product with this version that allows an attacker to impact something via this method, right? So they actually have a really good set of examples and like little formatter, which can help you build the right description, and then they'll change it because it might be just like a little off. That's what, I've never had one not changed so far. So I don't know, I guess I don't know how to communicate this, right? So you wanted to supply discovery credits and any applicable references, and there's like space for that. And MITRE usually will send you a reserved ID within 72 hours after the submission. And that ID is your identifier. Now, that identifier doesn't actually have any of this information in here. It's like hidden from the public, but it will be reserved. So if someone looks it up, they can't reserve it for themselves, or another CNA can't reserve it. And that's what you'll be using for your communications moving forward. And that's what the vendor should be using for their communications moving forward as well. Right, so next step, you need to publish. So, so basically you've set your embargo, right? You've talked to the vendor, they've agreed to fix the issue. It's, 45 days later. And that's like an ideal situation. It never ever happens like that. There's always problems, but that's why I say it's fun and varied depending on the vendor or publisher, right? And like how they respond to it. They don't have a security department. That this could go sour very quickly because they don't know what to do. If they never dealt with CVEs in the past, that also can cause a lot of churn. But let's say you've gotten past that step. You've communicated with them on the embargo. You've stated your expectations, right? Yeah. So so this should have been my previous step. Sorry about that. So in most cases, an embargo is set. Again, common practice is 45 to 90 days. And then you wait till that time elapses. So let's say we get to that point where the time elapses, right? Then you disclose, and you disclose as you see fit. Now, it would be ideal if the vendor discloses for you. And when we say disclosure, we really mean like something that has been published about the vulnerability. So like a patch has gone out, the vendor has published a software update mentioning the vulnerability. That's a that's a publishing thing. There's again, you can post your own blog, and we'll get into that in a second. But one thing I do mention here is if the vendor needs more time, be flexible with them. Sometimes they don't always have the resources you need. So like if you pass the embargo and they say, hey, we need more time, we want to work with you, be fair with them, but also set expectations and be clear. The one thing I did want to also mention here is like, as you kind of work with these vendors on communicating the publishing intentions, sometimes these relationships will go sour really fast, depending on, again, hi there, depending on a lot of things, right? So if your vendor is being crappy and they stop talking to you, or the communication has started getting hostile, one thing I would recommend trying is tap into a third-party resource like Vince. So Vince is from CERT, the Carnegie Mellon Software Engineering Institute. And basically, if you head down to that link down there, it's kb.cer.org/Vince. That can actually get you to this resource where you can create an account and basically disclose your vulnerability to impartial third party who will bring everybody to the table and start talking about remediation plans. What Vince will do is they will do their own publishing of the vulnerability, and they can confirm that your vulnerability is actually the real deal in some cases, depending on the scope. So, and that's something that you'd want to talk to the Vince people with about. I've done this before. recommended it to other people with mixed results, and I have also had mixed results. Sometimes the communication just gets so poor that they stop working with a third party as well. So just something that can help you cover your butt and just say, I did my due diligence. I tried to work with them. You know, eventually at some point, the stuff needs to come out. So actually publishing. So as I mentioned before, what does it mean to publish a finding? So needs to be published somewhere where the public can access. Again, vendor publishing is the best outcome, but you can have third-party publishing like Vents, for example, or another research company, or, you know, again, a friend, perhaps. You could also use a friend if you wanted to, but you can also do self-publishing if you want. So that's like a blog, a LinkedIn post. Sometimes I've even seen like Twitter, like tweets actually linked as publishings, and I don't know how I feel about that, but anyways, it's an option. Exploit DB, if you have a proof of concept code, they'll also take that kind of stuff. If you don't have a blog and you want to do CVE disclosures, it's a really good idea to set one up so you can do them. I know a lot of people choose to go that route because you have control over the message, and you just have more creative licensing there, which you may or may not want. Once you publish your finding by any of these means, right, you need to notify MITRE of publishment. So basically what you'll do is you'll go back to them, you'll say, hey, so this is my CVE, you guys gave this to me, you know, 6 months ago, back when I came to you. I would like to notify you of publishing, and then what they'll do is they'll take your references of publishing, and then they will make your CVE turn from like an invisible record to a visible record, and they'll publish that. Usually takes about a week for that to happen. It depends like how backlogged they are. They get tons of submissions like all the time. Sometimes it's really quick, sometimes it's not. So anyways. All right, so I'm going to just show you the CVE request page because I just want to kind of give you an idea of what we're going to be looking at. Just looking at the chat, do we have any recursive acronym? Yes, Brandon. Thank you, Brandon. Yeah, that a recursive acronym. That's great. So, all right. So I'm going to try to learn how to use my computer. All right. So this is, all right, come on. So this is the CVE request form. It looks really simple, but as you change options on here, it will start exploding. So basically, again, you're working on a piece of software. You want to like, you know, go to step 2 right away. What you would do is come down here. You select your action. And you have a bunch of different things. So you can report something. You can request a whole block of CVEs if you've got like a lot of vulnerabilities that you need to report. You can notify them about a publication, request updates, request information on a CNA program or other, right? So in our case, we're just going to report the vulnerability. You have to give them an email address. They won't disclose your email address from what I understand. So that doesn't come up on any sort of details unless you want that specifically to be published. Here you can ask for up to 10 IDs, and you need to do the following. You need to verify that it's not a CNA covered product. Again, that's like Adobe, right? And you verify that the vulnerability has not been assigned a CVE ID already, right? And to the best of your knowledge, you need to do that. You may not be aware if something is unpublished, right? And that's something you'll have to deal with when you get there. As I had mentioned, there are different types of vulnerabilities. So you'd want to select the one that fits the best here. So, you know, maybe we're reporting directory traversal, for example. I would say, you know, it's Joe Schmo's, Joe Schmo, right? And it's DocuReader version 1, right? Here you have the opportunity to tell them if the vendor has acknowledged or confirmed the vulnerability. Either work. It's always best if they say, we know about it, we appreciate it, but you're not always going to get that far with them. especially with your initial email, which may go unanswered for months. Here you select your tag type, the impact, the affected components. So here they have like source code file, affected function. Those details, if you need to put them in here, are available. They're not required. One thing I do want to also just mention, so there are like little tool tips here. So like if you, like we talked about the description, right? Meets a certain standard. If you forgot from this presentation on what that was, you could just click on something like this and it will take you to like a really useful like presentation on like how to write these kinds of vulnerability descriptions. So they give you examples of good vulnerabilities and bad vulnerabilities. So you can write a good one, hopefully not a bad one. So anyways, so these are here for you. Definitely use them, and they help you sort of like, again, fill this out to the best of your ability. It's your Discover credits, references, and additional information. After you submit the CAPTCHA, you're done. They'll send you the CVE in about 72 hours. Same thing if you need to let them know of a publishing, you just kind of do it. You go to the same form, you notify the CVE of a publication, and basically they say, where's the link to it? What's the CVE ID? Is there any additional information that you'd like to add to this record? And then you'd want to just go ahead and let them know what date it was published. And again, it takes about a week. Sometimes, so like, and again, I've not experienced where CVE says no, root CNA has said, no, we're not going to do that. But sometimes they will contact you if there's a problem with it and you need to resolve that. Again, kind of an ad hoc basis. Has anyone actually ever had a problem like that? Like, I know, Erica, you've published some. You ever had any problems with like MITRE saying, no, thanks?
This is for adding a CVE, but I was trying to update a CVE because
Yep.
there was a new version that I found the same thing but in a higher version. It was a bypass for a previous exploit, so I wanted to consider a new exploit, well, an old exploit kind of.
Yeah.
And they kind of had a problem with that because they couldn't find the original user that made the form. Yeah, mine is easier to work with than the vendors.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if you do updates and stuff like that, I can't really comment on that personally because I have not had those experiences. But like what Erica just said, if you didn't hear that, she had some problems just sort of requesting some changes where there's a new vulnerability, more or less. So your mileage may vary when dealing with MITRE. All right, so let's go back to my presentation. Any questions on this content? Nope. Okay, good. Yeah.
I wanted to say that the cool thing about the CNAs, even though you don't get a CVE out of it, a lot of them have bug bounty programs.
Yes. Actually, you can still get a, you definitely can get a CVE.
Really?
Yeah, from CNAs. So actually, that's in my next slides on how you actually work with them to get a CVE for that. So yeah, that's a good point though. Bug bounties are definitely, so Erica had mentioned, while working with you know, a CNA, you might not get a CVE, but you can get a bug bounty usually because these large corporations typically have some resources where you can get a payout of some sort. And again, that's sort of outside the scope of this talk, but that's definitely out there as an option. Okay, so how do I tell Adobe? This is going to be very, very basic. So if your bug is found within the software of a CV numbering authority, i.e. Adobe Reader, you need to do the following. You disclose the findings and request a CVE. Again, so if they are a CV numbering authority, they're going to have a way for you to contact them. It's going to be in their website somewhere. It's part of their agreement. If you go to MITRE's website, they'll have the emails for the CNAs listed and any sort of appropriate contact information. You need to use that in order to submit your stuff. Wait for findings to be published, or sorry, you disclose findings and request a CVE. So if you look back into the rules, right, CNAs are supposed to follow a certain set of rules. And if a security researcher requests a CVE, they must issue a CVE if they verify that it is a vulnerability. Okay, so sometimes, like Erica makes a really good point, sometimes these vulnerabilities get kind of swept under the rug and maybe not really formally addressed with something like a patch or a security bulletin. You can change that. You can definitely just request a CVE, and by their rules of that membership, they have to give you one. So, and if they don't give you one, remind them that as a member, they are supposed to. And I've had to do that, and that's okay. And they will definitely go back to the rules, and they'll say, "Oh, right, we have to do this because we're part of this, right?" And we want to. And the reason they want to be a member, just so you have more information, is they want to control the narrative of how this is released a little bit more, right? This just kind of allows them the ability to release this to their customers how they see fit. So you can't really set an embargo with a CNA like them. They kind of set their own timelines and will do whatever the heck they want. That's the one kind of sucky thing that does come out of working with a CNA like Adobe. Some super big enterprise companies will just have, they'll have their regular software development process, which will take 6 to 8 months or something like that for a patch. And then eventually that will get pushed out to users. And then eventually they'll come around and they'll publish the CVE finding after the patch has well been out in circulation. So you can collaborate with them, but they typically have their own security teams, their own processes, and they don't really want anything to do with you after they've given you the CVE. To Erica's point, there are sometimes bug bounties available if you're working with these big companies. There are lots of really good bug bounty resources out there, and these big corporations typically will have information about their bug bounty programs on their websites. So, as you're looking at their CNA information, definitely look to see if they have bug bounties where you could, possibly get some money from your disclosure. So, what are the benefits to reporting CVEs? Like, why do you want to do this? It sounds like a whole bunch of crap for not a lot of fun, right? Well, I say there's a few good reasons, right? It will help you bullet your resume, make your security experience look more, girthy, if you will. That's not the right word. I want to use something different. It can also help make the world a better place. I know it's cheesy, but there are so many CVEs out there that there's so many vulnerabilities out there that don't have proper stuff out there published about them, so users can use their software in a more secure way. So if you go in this sort of mode of hunting for CVEs and reporting them and going through this whole rigmarole, which can be a frustrating process. I by no means want to paint this as something that is easy or breezy, fun. It's usually something that you have to remind people and talk to them about this over and over and over again to get your publishings through. But it does make the world a better place. It helps, I think, too, in gaining a deeper understanding of how vulnerabilities are surfaced and put into the vulnerability lifecycle. And generally, products so if you think about Tenable, for example, they have their security scanners, and they hunt for CVEs and they'll find them and report on them. I think it's sort of interesting to go through this process where you disclose something to maybe a huge enterprise company. You tell them about it. It takes 8 months to get patched. Then it gets put into, circulation. Then they report on the actual security vulnerability and that you should patch for it, after the release notes. So it's been maybe a year since you've actually sent them any data. And then at that point, the vulnerability scanners get to start adding this to their stuff. So you're a year ahead of vulnerability scanners. Not to crap on vulnerability scanners, but again, this is just kind of it kind of drives it home for me, at least. Wow, it takes a long time for vulnerabilities to get into these programs, and maybe as security researchers, they're not so useful if you're more of an advanced researcher, right? So another thing you can do is you can do this right now to get more experience. If you are in a place where you want more security experience, you don't have to have a job doing security. You can get your experience right now by doing something just like this. And like Erica mentioned, bug bounties. You can make some cold, hard cash. Not a lot. I think a lot of researchers these days think, I think actually Scott mentioned once that it's kind of like the race to the bottom as far as like getting bug bounty payouts. I've done bug bounties before. They're okay. You know, it's not really exciting for me, but some people, hey, it's an extra bonus. Any questions, Ben? Oh, we're good. Okay. All right. So go find and do. So how do I look for CVEs? So there's a lot of different ways, right? And I'm going to share with you what I think are opportunities ripe for the picking. Now, I'm not going to cover about how to hunt for bugs here. This is way out of scope for this particular topic. Go watch the November talk that I mentioned earlier. Erica has some really great examples of attacks in the real world that you can find. And go on YouTube. There's a lot of different things out there. So how do you look for the software though? Like, so let's say you've watched Erica's video, you're ready to go, you want to start finding CVEs. Okay, so what I would suggest doing is picking an industry that uses technology and look towards the software needed to do jobs in that industry. And I almost feel like a random word generator would be useful in this kind of exercise because as I was trying to find examples for this talk, I was like, dog grooming, you know, tracking software. And there's like 40 different things that you can buy or try that are basically kennel pieces of software which help manage like kennels or dog grooming or all kinds of things, right? So, you know, do something that's interesting for you, right? There's, again, lots of different possibilities out there. You like 3D printing, there's a lot of crappy 3D printing software out there. Go research that, right? There's a lot of like open source stuff out there. One of the things that I looked for too is like, I was like, hotel cleaning management, where it's like a piece of software that like the head of the maid, I don't know, maids or head of the cleaning department will use to determine whether or not if a room has been cleaned or something like that. There's tons of software out there that just that does rudimentary functions like that. So go look at that. That's what I recommend. Ask yourself, you know, as you're looking at this, has a lot of money went into the security of this product? Like if you're using, like, say, I don't know, a super, like if you're using a security product itself, you know, or you're looking at a security product itself, and there might be more attention paid to that. So if you want something that's easier to find, like, again, easier vulnerabilities, just go to the things like the dog groomers, the maids, and things like that. Those are the easiest ones to find vulnerabilities. And again, you will find vulnerabilities if you look. I suggest that you start with a focus on free open source software and then smaller commercial offerings. These people need the most help, and they're gonna be thankful for your help, right? Free open source is generally like you'll run a pull request and people are like, wow, thank you for making the software better. This is gonna be great. And then smaller commercial offerings, I've worked with a few folks. Smaller commercial groups are like just so thankful. They're like, wow, you know, we don't have the money for like a security audit or something like this. This really, you know, makes our product better. Thank you so much. Here's a coffee mug. Again, but yeah, these are going to be the happiest ones. I wouldn't recommend necessarily going right to the enterprise or like the large corporations. They are hostile, actually. Oh yeah, you said I could make money. So let's talk more about that, because that's the more interesting thing, right? So related to this, there's a lot of researchers out there that find flaws in pieces of software or technologies. And oftentimes what they'll do is they'll go through the process of finding the vulnerability, maybe letting the people know that are responsible for the technology, but then using their knowledge to go do bug bounty programs. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. And you should totally do that. However, my personal bias and my thought process here is that disclosing soon is a good idea. You can go out there and get the bug bounties, that's great. If your research is well on its way for disclosure, yeah. So, sorry, this doesn't make any sense. But the one thing I do want to say here is, like, you can capitalize on your work. You totally should. But again, most researchers submit the work to companies and bug bounties. They do pay, but you want to read the rules too. There's some rules associated with certain bug bounties. Like, so some bug bounties won't actually take like certain types of flaws that are like previously undisclosed with like an RFC or something like that. So, you know, read the rules and make sure you're on the good side there. And tolerance for reporting is really up to you, right? So I think Erica, we had a conversation about this at DEF CON, and you had mentioned like, how long can you keep a CVE like unpublished? And yeah, so how long can you? You can technically leave it forever if you wanted to, right? But here's what I think, right? I think you should disclose, and I think you should publish within a common embargo date time frame, right? Because I want you to just put yourself in the shoes of the users, and at least that's what I think about, right? Get your bug bounties, like do that, be quick maybe, but also make sure that you get this out to people so they can start patching flaws and vulnerabilities in the software. So again, it's up to you, but also, you know, be good. That's what I would recommend. All right, so any questions so far on this content? No, okay, good. All right. A warning. Okay, so I've probably already shared with you that things can go sideways and vendors can be hostile. Be careful. If you start working with larger corporations, with shareholders, for example, you could be on the receiving end of some legal drama or some kind of bad juju, right? So make sure that you cover your bases and, you know, try not to like say, you know, do things that are kind of illegal. Try to be like legal and right. And again, if you follow this guide where you say in your first email what you plan on doing, what your deal is, that's usually good. But if you start opening a dialogue and you start talking with the vendor, that leaves it open for interpretation, where lawyers can come in and then other like business people can come in, and it can get problematic. Like I said, telling companies they have problems doesn't always go over so great. So nobody likes to hear they have problems. And if you are a publicly traded company, CVEs often equal risk. Risk equals time and money, and time and money spent does not necessarily equal money earned for shareholders. So there can be a conflict there. People are, you know, in that kind of situation, some companies are more interested in covering their ass than actually doing what's right for their users. Sad, but true. Okay. All right. So 3 cases. So this is my personal takeaway. So I have 6 vulnerabilities that are going to be published soon, but I've done a few over the last few months of my career. Again, I've wanted to get to that place where I didn't know anything, and I'm publishing. And here's 3 specific examples. 1, free open source software. Like I had mentioned, open source software people are really happy to hear from you, and they are really excited to hear from you. When I initially disclosed this vulnerability to the open source software team, they were delighted. They told me basically how I need to interact with their program. I needed to submit a pull request, more or less. And then they fixed it. Like a few days later, they agreed to be active participants in the process of actually disclosing a vulnerability. They gave me references. They did everything they needed to do. It was magical, super easy. I wish all of them worked that way, but they don't. So that was one experience. I worked with a commercial organization. They are publicly traded, but they're not a very big organization. And I've been working with them a little bit. I'm still actually fighting with them on one vulnerability, which is pretty bad. But I'll just kind of briefly talk about this. So this is how this worked. So I initially set up my email, told them what I planned on doing, and I didn't hear anything from them because it went to sales, and then sales sent it to someone else, and then they sent it to someone else, and it just, everybody in the company got scared. Like all of a sudden, like there's some crazy hacker dude stealing you know, social security numbers. It's literally what the email was about. And anyways, it was just a really sort of bad experience right from the get-go. They never had a security program, which is sort of unfortunate because they offer security services as a vendor. They didn't have a security program to deal with the software that they made themselves. So that was really tough. It required like a lot of back and forth with them. They wanted to get lawyers involved. They weren't quite sure how this process normally works, so they were frightened. It was just a really tough experience. And eventually, one of the things that I did do is I got Vince involved, because they weren't patching their software and they weren't telling their customers that they had problems, and it was so very bad that like I was just like, please help me do something. I don't want to just write something out on a blog somewhere saying that you guys suck. Right? I want you to fix it. I want you to do the right thing. Getting Vince involved was the right decision for me at that time. They were extremely helpful in helping prove that the vulnerability was a true thing, and then set some expectations on what that security response should look like. Vince is really good at helping shepherd companies like these, you know, larger commercial organizations into like, here's what you should do. And they actually like provide them with documentation and programs and templates and all that good stuff that companies need. Otherwise, they don't know what to do, right? They don't know how to interact with someone like me. So really good thing for Vince. Bad experience overall, but really good working with Vince, helping us kind of get that together. And finally, enterprise. So I recently got a CVE published on a very large, globally used piece of software. Excuse me. That's like installed in a lot of healthcare and government settings, and it's just all over the place. And it was it used to be a product owned by like HP Enterprise, and it's just, again, it's an enterprise piece of software used for managing clients. And it's not a great vulnerability. So basically the way that kind of worked is I got in touch with them. I told them the situation. I said, hey, you have a problem. I'm gonna need a CVE for this. And they said, great, we have a CVE for you, but we're not gonna tell you what it is. So that was against the rules. So they eventually, I reminded them that they need to provide me the CVE as part of the agreement that they entered into. Again, that kind of like, it didn't go great, but they eventually met the rules, sent me the CVE, and we collaborated together and we talked a little bit. They did have, I am a tiny bit sour about this one because I published a blog post where I basically dissed them because their support engineers were talking about the bug in their online forums, and they said it was not a big deal and that Windows will call 911 for you if Microsoft will call 911 for you if you run into this bug. And I was like, actually, no, that's not a good idea. But anyways, so the messaging was kind of weird, but they did rate it as a, a high risk issue. They patched it. They did what they were supposed to do, and they complied with the rules. And I think this is just one example of enterprises being CNAs. They might not really know what they're supposed to do as CNAs, even though they're CNAs. So it's always good to know what the rules are so you can check them. Okay. So that's really all I had for content as far as like talking about CVEs. I wanted to kind of open this up and see if you guys had any questions, though. Yes, Scott.
So, what is your responsibility for checking that they actually fix it?
I'm so sorry, I couldn't hear you over the fan.
So, do you have any responsibilities for checking that they actually fixed it?
Do you have any responsibilities for checking that they actually fixed it? So, I have found that they often will actually work with you to supply you a patch so you can verify that the patch fixes the problem. In the particular case of the enterprise one, they actually sent me a patch to test, and I sent it back to them saying that it was still broken, right? So although I would say that you are not always going to get that collaborative spirit with every single thing that you do. So I would say if you're interested, definitely check. If you're collaborating with them, they'll probably ask you to check, but you don't really have any responsibility per se. Yeah, Mark.
What if you send out an email and their response to it is if you publish it, we'll sue you?
Cool. So Mark's question was, if you send an email and they say they're going to sue you, you know, what do you do? So it might be a really good idea to talk to Vince at that point. They're a really great third-party mediator. And again, and one thing I do want to just kind of like as a side, you don't have to tell them who you are, right? You don't have to say, you don't owe them your name. You owe them the vulnerability, right? So
I was gonna say, I always do it anonymously, so I don't get anything associated with my job.
Yep.
Sometimes they're at work and sometimes they're at home, but
Yep.
I don't want anyone to know where it is. So.
yeah, so Erica, since the folks online can't hear this, Erica just mentioned when she does CVEs, she'll submit them anonymously because sometimes they come from work and sometimes they don't come from work, and she doesn't want to necessarily intermingle those things and, you know, complicate issues because, you know, this is a very real scenario, right? Where, you know, a company could say, I know your name, I know what you're doing, I'm gonna not sue you, I'm gonna sue your employer specifically, right? That happens, okay? That really does happen. So, you know, working from a sense of anonymity, like initially, is probably a good idea. It's not necessary, but it doesn't hurt you. Like, I personally, I'm a reckless person, so I just talk to them as me. But yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, definitely be anonymous when possible. Good. Any other questions? How about from our online folks? Do you have any questions? Brandon says, the girthy is a perfect word. Don't kid yourself. Okay. Thank you, Brandon. Yeah, awesome. Any other questions? No? All right. Well, thank you. Here's a quick set of resources I just want to share with you. Again, CVE MITRE, this is like really basic. Vince, check them out. If you're going to deal with commercial offerings, just work with them. They're helpful. And then mainsec.org. Ben mentioned it before. Go to mainsec.org. It's awesome. It's a Slack channel. You can meet everyone here, talk about this, and get notified of new events. And then, oh, and then just, this is my contact information. If you want to link to me, I'm there. If you want to email me, I'm there. And then I have a blog. It's at marbasec.com. So thank you for your time.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for coming out today. I hope you all enjoyed Mr. Allen's talk here. And it's been great to see you all. And thanks again. Thanks for coming. Join MainSec and have a great rest of the day online. And for those in person, we'll look at having a happy hour of this. But again, thank you all online.